Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. Our guest this evening is Stephen Pidgeon. He's an attorney. He's also a student of ancient languages of Scripture. He's written a very interesting book called The Obama Era, and I know of two of his websites, perhaps three. These two, one's NorthAmericanLawCenter.org and the other one's StephenPidgeon.com. I'd like to really thank Stephen for joining us again this evening. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. It's just great to be with you tonight.
We had such an interesting conversation last time you were on, and it went so many different directions. It was a bit difficult to choose which way I wanted this show to go, but I think I want to start out by talking about Syria and the two different sects of Islam that are fighting each other. I'd also like to get your take on Bashar al-Assad, the current president of Syria. I guess he's being backed up by the Russians, and they're fighting ISIS right now. Why is the United States opposing Russia and Syria? I don't understand this at all, sir. Please comment.
Well, I think first we have to explore the background, what happened here, because the United States really has had no national interest in Syria and continues to have no real national interest in Syria. The Saudis, however, and the Qataris and the ruling house of the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait, they very much have an interest in Syria. So the chief difficulty is that you have Russia, which is the largest natural gas provider in the world, and Russia is supplying anywhere from 40 to 60% of the natural gas used by Western Europe. The Saudis, the Qataris, the Kuwaitis, the people from UAE, they want to put their natural gas into Europe. Well, the difficulty is that in order to run a natural gas pipeline from those countries, if you look at that area of the world, you will see that they are kind of cut off from being able to run a natural gas pipeline, primarily because of the policy failure of the Obama administration. If you recall that we had really some kind of victory obtained under the Bush administration in Iraq, that at least Iraq was some kind of a client state of the United States following Desert Storm and a latter battle that took place in there during the W's administration. However, Mr. Obama totally squandered that victory. And when he squandered that victory, the government in Baghdad, which is a Shiite majority government, allied itself with Shiite-dominated Iran. So for all intents and purposes, Iran and Iraq are of the same allegiance, that is to say a Shia or Shiite allegiance. Syria is an interesting country in that the difference between Syria and Iraq is that Syria has a majority Sunni population but is governed by a Shiite minority. When Saddam Hussein was governing Iraq, Saddam Hussein was a Sunni minority governing in a real apartheid state over a vast Shiite majority and a Kurdish minority. So what you see is this horn of influence of the Shia religion has gone from Iran to Iraq and is now in joint coalition with Syria and, of course, the proxy army in southern Lebanon called Hezbollah. So you have a strong Syrian horn here that blocks Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and Kuwait from being able to run their natural gas into Turkey in order to put it into Europe, at least by means of pipeline. That leaves them no alternative. They're going to have to ship their natural gas via the standard shipping lanes, primarily through the Persian Gulf, and then around the Gulf of Arabia and through the Red Sea up through the Suez Canal. And if you know what's going on there in Yemen, there is an intense conflict going on right now because Iranian proxies are trying to seize control of that waterway between the Gulf of Arabia and the Red Sea, which would also prevent these very same countries from being able to ship their gas that way. That means they'd have to ship their gas around the Horn of Africa, which makes it completely non-competitive. Hence, the Saudis have a national interest in overthrowing Bashar al-Assad, the Qataris, the Kuwaitis, and the members of UAE. And as a consequence, they are the ones who are funding this proxy army, and they essentially snapped their fingers, and Obama jumped and began manipulating a civil war in Syria. And so there is no national interest there. What we're doing there is we're doing the bidding of Saudi Arabia. And, of course, Hillary Clinton, who has a huge obligation to Saudi Arabia, having taken hundreds of millions of dollars in the Clinton Foundation, did, an enormous number of illegal and criminal deeds to further this agenda. She was responsible primarily for the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and again, we had no national interest there whatsoever. She moved in 200,000 tons, her and Obama working together in violation of the War Powers Act, put 200,000 tons of arms in Libya. And they were arming Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and these mercenaries that would later form as ISIS. Then from there, she brokered a deal to move these weapons through Turkey into Syria. Unfortunately, some of these weapons ended up in Afghanistan and were responsible for killing American soldiers in Afghanistan as well, Stinger missiles. But the weapons that she moved into Turkey and then moved down into Syria, those weapons were intended for a group that she and the Saudis and Barack Obama and other minions working with him created, formed, funded, and armed, which is ISIS, which is the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Now, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria is a Sunni organization that is a proxy army for Saudi Arabia. Now, some people may say, well, I don't believe that they're a proxy army for Saudi Arabia. Well, do yourself a favor. Anyone who knows anything about Islam will tell you that when an Islamic nation goes to war, they go to war under a black flag. They go to war under a black flag. And so ISIS has a black flag. But if you pull up an image of that ISIS black flag on Google Earth, and you pull up an image of the non-warring country that has that same flag, you will find that it's the flag of Saudi Arabia in green. So the flag of ISIS is the Saudi Arabian flag made black.
Really?
Absolutely. So when you see...
That's very incredible. Can I throw a couple questions in here, because this is so incredibly complicated. So if I'm understanding what you're saying, are you inferring that Saudi Arabia, how can I say this, is influencing our government?
They're not influencing it, they're controlling it.
Okay, that's the word I was trying to find. Our politicians are being controlled by the government of Saudi Arabia. This is stunning. Please continue.
That's correct. Well, it's been going on for a long time. And, Barack Hussein Obama has a particular obligation to the Saudis, given that he was, funded, trained, groomed to be president by a Saudi sheikh named Sheikh bin Talal, who began funding him in 1981. And Sheikh bin Talal, of course, is the one who gave the $25 million gift to Harvard to make sure that Barack Hussein Obama, who had a fraudulent Columbia degree, could get into Harvard Law School. And he gave a $25 million gift to create an Islamic Studies Center. And the condition of the gift was that Barack would be allowed into the law school. And they took the gift, and the woman who took the gift on behalf of Harvard is Elena Kagan, who now sits on the U.S. Supreme Court. Sheikh bin Talal went on to fund a lot of other things, and of course, in January 2009, he put $6.5 billion into Fox News.
$6.5 billion into Fox News. That's
right.
Incredible. So you're telling me foreign governments have given $6 billion to Fox News?
Sheikh bin Talal, in particular, one of the members of the Saudi royal family.
That is incredible. Now, how did you find that out?
It was well published throughout all the mainstream news. You can pull probably 100 articles up on it right now. Fox
Really?
News was on the verge of bankruptcy following the 2008 market collapse, and they were upside down. And of course, anybody who knows anything about business, you know that when a business is upside down, they're running red ink, and they've been running red ink for a long time. Their chief problem is cash flow. They can't make payroll, they can't make this, they can't make the other thing. And so enter the person with the cash, and when the person with the cash comes in, even if the market value or the market capitalization of the company is $100 billion, somebody comes in with $6.5 billion, they control that company. And that's exactly what happened with the Sheikh bin Talal bailout.
So, I mean, this is just such huge news. That means our country is infiltrated. Hillary and the current government are basically working for this Sheikh bin Talal, who is this powerful. Is he in charge of all of Saudi Arabia, or is he just a rich, powerful person in Saudi Arabia?
No, he's just the funding agent. But if you remember, Barack Obama, when he first got elected, he traveled to Saudi Arabia and he bowed to the Saudi king. You might remember that.
Yes, I do.
And when he bowed to the Saudi king, it's because that is who was controlling the American government. There was probably a third of Barack Obama's funding in the 2008 election came from offshore sources, mostly out of the Middle East, that was brokered through a telephone service, a call service that was housed in the Gaza Strip. He paid them $23.9 million commission with American taxpayers' money in February of 2009. So
our government is basically overthrown at this point, correct?
That's yes, I think that's a correct synopsis. It's been completely usurped.
Completely usurped. So if Hillary gets in power, it's going to be, what would be the agenda then of Saudi Arabia, to get us into World War III, to completely destroy this country, or what?
Well, the Saudis, I don't think, want to destroy the United States, but they definitely want to destroy Russia, and they want to destroy all the enemies that are preventing them from, the Saudis are kind of myopic here. We want to sell our natural gas to Europe, and we want it uninhibited. We want the shortest path possible right on up through eastern Syria, so that we can connect to Turkish pipelines, and then those pipelines will feed natural gas directly into Western Europe, and we will secure that market. And it's a market that Russia is currently supplying. So obviously, if the Saudis, Qataris, Kuwaitis, UAE, Bahrain, and so forth pump their natural gas in, they can displace Russian natural gas, and the Russian economy will then begin to suffer, or Russia will have to sell all its natural gas to India and China like it's currently doing with its crude oil. So they haven't lost anything in terms of market share, but the Saudis are cut out of the market share. And they know that their oil production days, they've had the tap wide open, trying to depress the price of oil. And so they know that their future, and the Saudis are running big deficits right now, they know their future depends upon them of getting their natural gas to market. But their larger problem is Iran, of course. Now, you hear Benjamin Netanyahu come out and say, well, Iran's trying to develop a nuke for purposes of killing Israel, They're, once they get a nuke, they're going to want to kill Israel. Well, the truth is, Iran is aiming its missiles and its military machine at Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia is a robust, very racist Sunni regime that will not tolerate Shiites inside its country, let alone they won't tolerate Shiites, they won't tolerate Christians, they won't tolerate Jews. If you come into Saudi Arabia with the Bible, you go to prison.
Wow.
There's no Christian churches in Saudi Arabia, zero, none. And this same organization, Saudi Arabia, is, funding hundreds, thousands of mosques in the United States. But, you're not going to find a Presbyterian church somewhere in Saudi Arabia. It doesn't exist. And so because they're so intolerant to the Shiites, the Iranians are not going to put up with it. So the Iranians have made, they have 100,000 missiles pointed at Saudi Arabia right now. And they are currently funding the Houthis in Yemen, who are operating in a proxy war against Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has actually deployed its military into Yemen, and if you look, you can look it up on YouTube right now, you will see that nuclear weapons have been used in Yemen already.
Really? Wow.
Absolutely. Now, they're not big. They're in a 12 kiloton bunker buster tactical nuclear weapons.
Right.
But most assuredly, nuclear weapons have been used in Syria as well.
Crazy.
It is crazy.
So, I've heard that General Michael Flynn, I think he was the former head of the DIA, stated that Obama and Hillary were supporting ISIS. Is that correct?
That's correct. And you don't have to take his word for it. You can pull up a YouTube video right now where Obama openly admits that he's funding ISIL, he calls it. The difference, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria versus his version of the acronym, which is the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Now, the Levant would also include Lebanon and Israel and Jordan. So he has an expansive view of ISIS. But the fact is, Hillary is the one that created them. She did it by bringing arms from Libya through Turkey into Syria and arming every Sunni radical terrorist that she could find. And so you had al-Nusra, and you had Islamic Jihad, you had the Libyan Islamic Jihad. They even funded Osama bin Laden's former bodyguard. And they placed incredible weapons in their hands, including Stinger missiles, shoulder-fired man-pads that are capable of taking down a commercial aircraft at 28,000 feet.
Wow.
These were put in the hands of these, and then you had people who were involved in the United States military, PSYOP command, Senator John McCain. There's photographs of John McCain standing in outside a building in Damascus with al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, and his entire leadership.
McCain.
And so they were funding them. Senator McCain.
Jeez. So has Saudi Arabia basically bought off like a whole bunch of our politicians here in the U.S., Hillary, McCain, Obama, etc.?
Well, let's see. I have very little evidence of Saudi Arabia buying off Obama, although I believe his first election in 2008, a huge segment of the funds that came into him came into him through Gaza in the form of donations that were under the credit card limit from these multiple partners in the Middle East: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE. Those partners were funding him, and they put a substantial funding into his campaign in 2008, and they probably funded again his campaign in 2012. Hillary Clinton, the WikiLeaks has demonstrated that she's taken at least $300 million from the Saudis into the Clinton Foundation. And as you know, the Clinton Foundation has done no charity work. Something like 5.7% of the money that's come in has actually been used for charity. The rest is used to give Chelsea a fat apartment and to pay themselves exorbitant fees and basically allow them any spending that they want to do. So you have a corrupt Clinton Foundation, which is essentially a money laundering facility, and it's not just a money laundering facility for the Clintons and these Middle Eastern agents that we're talking about. It's also money laundering for Russian mafia and other people that are moving funds in and out of that organization. They think it connects to virtually everybody in D.C. But we have two significant hawks in the U.S. Senate, Lindsey Graham and Senator John McCain, and both of them have been intimately involved in arming and deploying ISIS. ISIS was Hillary's creation, funded by Obama, trained, deployed, armed. I mean, they were running around with all American arms. They've proven that all of this stuff was done with American arms in this civil war. They were given oil wells in Iraq that were taken away from the Iraqi government, given to ISIS. ISIS was controlling them. The U.S. would come over and bomb Iraqi troops accidentally in order to make sure that ISIS could control these oil wells, that they could control Mosul, and they could control other cities up in the northern section of Iraq. Then they began bootlegging this oil. President Erdogan's son was the one bootlegging the oil over the Turkish border. They would take it out to Turkish ports, and then they would ship it into Europe and ship it into other ports where it would be sold at a discount. But they had no cost involved in the oil because they stole the infrastructure. So they were making millions of dollars. ISIS was making millions of dollars per month on bootleg oil. And they were using that money to create a civil war in Syria. There was no civil war in Syria. There were no human rights violations. You had essentially a secular government under Dr. Assad. And now, look, I'm no fan of Assad. Assad, when he was younger, did a lot of things to the Christian faction that was running Lebanon. There was a lot of subversive activity that took place out of Syria, including assassinations of the Christian leadership in Lebanon. But he maintained a secular state in Syria where Christians were living, where Jews were living, and where Muslims were living, both Sunni and Shiite. And so and they were relatively at peace. The United States created the Civil War by arming these factions of terrorists, these Sunni terrorists, who then there's even an email that indicates that Hillary Clinton is the one that directed the sarin gas to be put into Turkey and then the sarin gas to be put in the hands of al-Qaeda in Syria, who then used the sarin gas to kill 250 civilians in order to blame it on Bashar al-Assad to say he was gassing his own people. There's an evidentiary record of this.
Jeez. Let me back up here. This is just so stunning. So wow, the average voter for Hillary just thinks that Trump is being mean-spirited or ridiculous when he says that Hillary's crooked. But the reality of the situation is, if these WikiLeaks that you're talking about are true, that Hillary was the one that commanded the use of the poison gas in Syria. I mean, it's so
That's
much.
Correct.
It's so bad that I can see why the average voters can't believe it, right? It's just, oh my goodness. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I interrupted.
Well, that's what Stalin said, right? Stalin said to kill one person is murder, but to kill a million is a statistic.
Right.
And
Goodness.
so at some point, you get to a point where the overwhelming criminality is so criminal. There's so many consecutive acts of treason and so many consecutive acts of war crimes and espionage and betrayal of the nation. And then you have to ask yourself the question, well, what's going on here? Why isn't anybody doing anything? In fact, there is quite a well-documented record of Hillary directing the funding directly to ISIS through HSBC in Switzerland. And a guy named Brad Birkenfeld has demonstrated this he's given all the accounts. He's given the Saudi sheikh that was on one end of the accounts with Hillary on the other end and ISIS being the recipient. And this stuff is well documented. So when Trump says that Hillary is crooked, I mean, that's the understatement of the year. I mean, look, from a lawyer's point of view,
right.
if you have an email that's classified, okay, it's marked with a C inside brackets at the upper left-hand corner, C inside brackets. So anybody who's in the United States government knows that's a classified email. So there is a litany of laws governing how that email can be handled, what kind of server it can be on, who can read it, who can access it, everything. Everything is controlled on that email. To knowingly put that email on a private server is an act of espionage.
Goodness. She intentionally destroyed 30,000 of those emails when there was a subpoena for those emails from Congress, correct?
Right. But, of course, the absurdity of this is that she thinks by bleaching her server and taking her BlackBerries and pounding them with a hammer, which is what she did.
Right.
They pounded their BlackBerries with, take the cell phones out and beat them up with a hammer, right?
Right. It's so absurd.
It truly is. But, she's thinking that nobody else had it. Of course the NSA has every email. The FBI has never asked the NSA for them, but the NSA has every single email, every text, and they have recordings of every conversation she's ever had. So she can bleach whatever she wants at her household. It's not going to erase the record. Now, in addition to that, she didn't even have encryption going on her emails. Okay, she didn't even have simple encryption. So as a consequence, Guccifer, WikiLeaks, the Russian, FSB, MI6, French intelligence, Swiss intelligence, the Greeks probably had it for all I know. Everybody and their brother had access to her server.
So when Julian Assange releases these emails, it's kind of redundant because the NSA already has them anyway, and so do a whole bunch of other governments, right?
That's correct.
It's like we're living in a very strange movie. The thing that scares me is that Hillary could cheat her way into the presidency. Have you seen any of the videos now where the insiders in the Democratic Party were basically spilling the beans about how they ship in these people and they bust these people in and then they vote and then they take them somewhere else and they vote again and then they take them somewhere else and how they've been trying to create all these riots at the Trump rallies? And have you seen those films?
Yeah. It's it's communism 101, right?
Goodness.
And of course, that isn't really the way they do the bulk of the election cheating. The way they do the bulk of the election cheating has to do with the machines that they use for counting the votes. And as Stalin said, it's you voted, you got the chance to vote. That's enough. It's not who votes that counts; it's who counts the votes.
My goodness.
And so what they do is they take these machines, and the machines, of course, have USB ports on these machines. And so after the election's had and they close the polls and all the election observers go home, then these guys enter the building with these USB ports and they just plug the USBs in and the machines give the reading they want. And so it doesn't make any difference how many ballots you put through the machine. The machine yields the vote that's been predetermined. So the whole name of the game is when you have an absolutely catastrophic candidate like Hillary Clinton.
Right.
I mean, she's just a walking disaster, right? I mean, she has no credentials. Everything she's done, she has totally screwed up.
Right.
I mean, she can't. She's the one that launched this Arab Spring. Look, all the millions of refugees that are in Europe right now are there as a direct result of what Hillary Clinton did to their country when she was in office as Secretary of State. The problem we're having with the Chinese military buildup has to do with what her and her husband did, selling American nuclear and missile technology to the Chinese and then putting the money in their own personal bank account while they were betraying the nation's most private technology to the Chinese. Now we're facing it on the battlefield.
So the Clintons will take money from the Chinese or Saudi Arabia. They really have no allegiance in that sense. Is that true?
That's correct. They don't care. There's no national allegiance going on here. It's just a bald-faced push for power. They don't care if it's the United States, if it's Arkansas, if it's Argentina. The only reason they're in the United States is because they can make more money looting and pillaging this place than they could in, let's say, Argentina or Uzbekistan or some other place.
Do you think
that's what they're about?
Do you think Hillary will get in then?
Well, here's their plan, and let me show you how this election rigging works. You have a candidate here that has something less than 30% of the electorate is going to vote for her. Mm-hmm. I've seen polls polling her as low as 19%. And so with her polling at 19%, how do you possibly rig an election when nobody's voting for this person? You know, you got 70% of the people voting Trump, 19% voting Hillary. How can you possibly make the election work? Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to lie about where she is with the electorate. So you take all the mainstream media, and they just keep spouting, oh, she's ahead by 2 points. She's ahead by 4 points. Or Trump's ahead by 1 point. Or Trump is ahead in New York, but he's going to lose Ohio. Or, you know, you give all of these absolutely lying poll results. It's just pure, in-your-face propaganda, unsubstantiated, unwarranted, not true, just false. And they take that stuff, they put those poll results out there to convince the American public that the election is close, when it's not. Then, of course, what they do is they fix the machines, so the machines read 51-49, 51-49, and then they declare the election to be a win for Hillary Clinton, who won by only 2 percentage points, or it was the narrowest election in American history. She won by only 0.5 percentage points, or 2.6 million votes, right?
Wow.
When she lost big time. But that's why the MSM is giving you these poll numbers, because they're trying to convince the American public that it's close when it isn't. And so she isn't going to campaign because they already know the blue states where they have the election rigged. And so the election's already rigged. It doesn't make any difference. The votes are already cast. It doesn't make any difference how people vote one iota. They have the machines fixed. The machines are going to give a 51-49 total on behalf of Hillary Clinton in 19 states, and she's going to claim a majority of the electoral votes, and that's that.
So what happens next? Do you think when Hillary gets in that she will start a third world war with Russia?
Well, she's already said that she's going to do that.
Goodness.
So Russia, of course, now, and this I think is so important for your listeners to know. We are on the verge of a nuclear war with Russia right now. You know, the Russians on October 4th launched a drill to put 40 million Russians into underground bunkers. And 40 million Russians did, in fact, go into underground bunkers for 3 days. During that 3-day period of time, yes, absolutely.
40 million, that is phenomenal.
That's phenomenal, yes. Anybody in Russia that could find their way to a nuclear bunker went to a nuclear bunker for 3 days. During that period of time, go ahead.
Russia doesn't have a huge population. That would be like 1/3 of their population, right? Something like that?
Yeah, that's virtually. I mean, you know, everybody in St. Petersburg, everybody in Moscow, and then most of the cities that were potential strikes, all of those people went to nuclear bunkers.
Gosh, crazy. Go ahead.
Then during that same period of time, Sorchafal, which is a Russian foreign ministry operative, they came out and published a report saying that all of the Russian nuclear subs were successful in getting into strike position against the United States. So they were preparing a major sub-launch nuclear strike on the United States on October the 7th. And the reason they were preparing that is because Barack Obama and the Pentagon were planning on a 800 fighter aircraft strike against the city of Damascus.
What?
Now, you know, this prop. Oh, yeah, there's a prophecy in Isaiah 17:1 that says, Damascus shall be a ruinous heap. And Obama is intending on, if we can't win this thing with a civil war by funding all of these, you know, these gutter rat barbarians of Sunni terrorists, and by putting money and arms in their hands, well, then let's just go after Assad directly and bomb his city into oblivion with a massive, overwhelming strike using 800 fighter aircraft, 160 of which would have been from Turkey, using this massive airstrike on Damascus. And the Russians came out and said, well, here's what you need to know. If you bring these aircraft over Syria, we have deployed these S-300 and S-400 advanced missile systems that not only would those missile systems have taken out the large, vast majority of those fighter aircraft before they got within 150 miles of Syria, but they would have also taken out all of our low-level satellites over the whole region.
Jeez.
Okay, so this was the strike that was planned, and when Obama was preparing to make this strike, Russia put its nuclear subs off our coast, preparing for a nuclear strike against the United States. So Barack Obama's called off that strike and started doing other things like deploying 1,000 nuclear weapons in Poland and Romania facing Russia, and moving tens of thousands of American troops into Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and in Romania in order to bolster the Ukrainian government, which, by the way, is engaged in genocide against the civilian population in Donbass right now that we're backing. So the response to that, well, day before yesterday, the Russians began moving nuclear warheads into the theater. And these are big nuclear warheads. 2 days before that, they put all of their nuclear ICBMs into strike position. Now, these nuclear missiles are called the Topol, and they're the fastest ICBMs ever built. They travel at Mach 10. They carry a 550 kiloton warhead. That's 55 times more powerful than the warhead used on Hiroshima. They can strike anywhere in the United States in a time between 16 and 22 minutes from the time of launch.
Are you hearing static? I don't know if it's on my line or
Yes.
yours. I think it's mine.
I am hearing static, yes. Sorry about that. We got a little bit of interference there. But
I don't know if it's you or me. I think it might be me. I'm wondering if I should call back into the show here. Let me hang up, folks. I will play some nature sounds. I'll hang up and then I'll call right back in.
I'll call you right back in, okay? I'll call back in.
You try it, and then I'll try it if that doesn't work.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, folks, I don't know if this will clear up the line or not. We'll see. Stephen will log out here and then log back in. There he goes. So I'm still hearing some static. Yeah, so it's probably me. It's probably me, which is a little... I'm speechless. I can't even... this is so much worse than I even imagined. So let me... Stephen, is this you 425?
This is me.
Okay. All right, folks, hang tight. I'm going to hang up and then call back in. Usually this works just fine. I think we need to get rid of the static. Okay, folks. I'm back. Stephen, are you still there?
Yes, I am. I think we've got a much clearer line now.
Fantastic. You know, this is so much worse than I even could wrap my mind around. So you must have connections, because how else could you know about all the movement with all the different military? And I know you can't reveal your connections, but if you can give us any other information, I mean, how did you know about the Russians? How did you know about this attack with 800 aircraft? This is just amazing stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, the 800 aircraft discussion was actually delivered, I believe, through RT. I think they were the ones that talked about that. But there have been other corroborating sources, and of course, I can't go into the details about where all the intelligence comes from. But I can tell you that most of this stuff can be researched. Your listeners can research this and discover the information for themselves. There's backup information online that will talk about what's there. And so what you see is, and I can tell you that whole proposed strike mechanism, where you're talking about 800 aircraft over Damascus, that concept of striking Damascus in that means has not gone away. That's not gone away. I mean, you know, the U.S. has moved fuel tankers into the theater, you know, for fueling fighter aircraft. We've moved, you know, massive numbers of bombers into the theater. I'm not going to say where, but we've moved massive numbers of bombers, B-52s, B-1s, B-2s. And, of course, the difficulty that's not being discussed now is that the Iranian card is being played. Iran has marshaled 1 million troops under arms, and they are preparing for a face-off against Saudi Arabia, who just a few months ago put 350,000 troops, 2,500 F-16s, 10,000 tanks, 2,900 helicopters at the northern end of Saudi Arabia facing Iraq as a demonstration of force. So you see that you have a substantial military buildup, and this military buildup that's going on in that theater is very huge, and it is a tinderbox. Just yesterday, or it might have been the day before, Turkish F-16s fired on Greek aircraft. They're both in NATO, and they engaged in a dogfight over Greek skies.
It's just stunning. I'm speechless. What is this war about even? I don't even know.
It's about whether or not Saudi Arabia gets a gas pipeline through Syria. They told Assad they were going to put one in.
The whole thing is about a freaking gas pipeline.
The whole thing is about a gas pipeline.
My God.
And,
it's just, I can't even wrap my mind around people.
What's the American national interest here? What's our national interest? Why aren't we shipping natural gas into Europe?
I have no idea. This is just
because the government is owned by Saudi Arabia.
Our government is owned by Saudi Arabia. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Jeez. My God.
So let's see if we can get some evidence behind this. First of all, you know that when you ask your congressman, you write your congressman, hey, could you, I've got a little problem here at home with blah, 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 whatever it might be. Can you write a letter to, or can you represent me as to such and such? Your congressman just shines you on. They don't care about the opinion of the people who voted them in, not one iota. Now, there may be some exceptions, but the vast majority of the congressmen that are in Washington, D.C. do not work for the people who elected them. They work for the people who funded them. Once you understand that, then you know that who are these guys working for? You ask yourself, why is Congress doing this stuff? Does Tennessee have an interest in this? Does the state of Washington have an interest in this? Does Ohio have some dog in this fight? None, zero. But the corporations that paid them to get in that office have a fighting interest in what happens in Saudi Arabia, what happens in Dubai, what happens in Qatar, what happens in the defense spending contracts to put arms into this particular country or that particular country. Yeah, that's who's running the show.
And folks, I apologize again about the static, but we must be getting some interference, which I guess would make perfect sense. So how long have you been sitting on this information? Has this been like burning a hole in your psyche, wanting to tell people about this?
Well,
I can't imagine.
It does kind of burn a hole. It does kind of burn a hole in my psyche in this respect. We're on the verge of World War III. The mainstream media is not telling the American public. The mainstream media didn't tell the American public how close we were to being under a nuclear strike on October 7th. They didn't say a word. And the ante keeps going up. I mean, as we speak right now, Russia is moving its aircraft carrier and 3 of its largest destroyers into the Mediterranean Sea to directly confront American naval vessels in the American Sea, including anti-submarine ships. So to the extent that the Americans have deployed submarines in the Mediterranean, and I don't know if we have or not, but if the plan now is to strike Damascus with sub-fired Poseidon missiles or some kind of MIRV or whatever it's going to be, to strike Damascus in order to kill Assad in Damascus, the Russians are now deploying major assets to directly confront the subs that may be in the Mediterranean. So you see a massive, massive, massive buildup of weapons that is taking place now in Turkey, Greece, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. All of these places are gearing up for a major, major confrontation. So the question now becomes, well, if that occurs, how will that war escalate to reach American shores? That's a question. And a lot of it depends on what America does and what Barack Obama does. Now, as I mentioned before, the Ukrainian government, which is an illegitimate regime that was placed in Ukraine by the United States, who engaged in a war crime to overthrow the democratically elected regime of Ukraine and a crime against humanity, and they installed Nazis to run Ukraine, whose first order of business was to require the registration of the Jews. That was the very first. They did that the second day they were in power, to require the registration of the Jews. Most of the people living in the Crimea are Russian Jews. This is why the people in Crimea cried out for Russian intervention, because the Ukrainian government had gas chambers intended for those people.
Again, I'm having cognitive dissonance because this is just so incredible. Continue.
Yeah, and so 20,000 people who were outside of Crimea, 20,000 Jews who were outside of Crimea living in Odessa, were immediately evacuated by the Israeli government to Israel to get them out of Odessa so that they didn't face genocide. And then the Ukrainian government went over to the Russian section of Ukraine where all those people speak Russian and they have Russian passports, and they began to bombard apartment buildings with tank and artillery fire. They weren't killing army people. They were killing civilians in the Donbass region. So you had 15,000 dead in the first 90 days.
Has this been on the news at all? I haven't heard anything about this.
No, you have to get news source from offshore. You can't. There's no news in America. You have to get news from the BBC. You have to get it from sources in France, RT, Al Jazeera. You know, there's numbers of other news sources that are outside the United States where you can obtain this information.
This is incredible.
And So when you see this information, when you realize what the civilian death toll is in Ukraine, and you see what's going on with this illegitimate regime, now Barack Obama says, well, the Russians shot down MH370. The Russians released a video showing a Ukrainian aircraft firing a missile at MH370 and downing the 777 over Ukraine. They released a video showing it. You have Obama says that the Russians annexed Crimea. The people in Crimea cried out saying, come in here before they kill us all. The Russians came in, secured the border, and they had a vote 90% in favor of rejoining Russia. The Russian-speaking people in Donbass declared Novo Russia in Ukraine. They want to be part of Russia. That's very, very clear. They're Russian. They hold Russian passports. Barack Obama's – you have to remember that when the Soviet Union fell, we made a promise that we would never put NATO in Russia's near neighbors. Now, Russia's near neighbors are Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, Georgia, Azerbaijan, right? Georgia has been moved into NATO. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia have massive NATO troops in it. And now we've placed nuclear weapons in Poland, and we've placed nuclear weapons in Romania. That would be like the Russians placing nuclear weapons in Cuba and putting nuclear weapons in Mexico.
Unbelievable.
We almost went to war over that in 1963, if you recall, during the Kennedy administration.
Right. Bay of Pigs, all 9 yards, right?
Yeah.
I'm at this point. Stephen. I am just so overwhelmed. I'm sorry, I'm not interacting that much. I want to give you the floor and just listen because this is mind-boggling, and we'll go as long as you want. Go ahead.
Well, the thing that alarms me the most is that, first of all, the American media is not reporting it, and so Americans have no opportunity to prepare for what's coming, or to even voice their opinions to require Mr. Obama and the Pentagon to stop doing what they're doing. You know, if you don't deploy nuclear weapons in Romania and Poland, the Russians wouldn't be putting nuclear weapons in Kaliningrad. But the Russians have moved 200 Iskanders into Leningrad, right?
200 what?
Iskanders.
What are those?
Those are short. Those are nuclear weapons that can. There are nuclear weapons that can reach. They have a short range. I think they're 900 kilometer.
Okay.
But 900 kilometers from Kaliningrad will strike Helsinki, Tallinn, Riga, Vilnius, Berlin, Warsaw. All of those places are within the target range that can be struck within 2 minutes.
Stunning. And all of this is over a freaking gas pipeline.
All of this is over a Saudi-demanded gas pipeline.
That just seems so absurd to me. You're going to risk destroying the entire world so you can make some money off of a gas pipeline.
Well, part of the dynamic is if they don't do it, Russia's economy continues to grow, and it grows as a natural resource-based economy. Our economy, thanks to the socialists that have been running this country, has been in a complete free fall. And a socialist, you have to remember, a progressive, can't think beyond socialism or progressivism. Their only formula is tax more and spend more because the money actually belongs to the government, not the people who earn it. So once they start killing the golden goose, they look around and say, well, what can we do? Well, I don't know. That country's doing better than we are. We better kill them, blow up their infrastructure and stuff so we can steal their markets. That's the mindset. Instead of competing by allowing a free market to survive, competition, small businesses, etc.
I know a lot of people that think like Alex Jones, the fearmonger, and sometimes I kind of think that too. But now that I've heard you, lay all this out, I'm thinking, wow, he's not a fearmonger at all. Have you tried to get back on Alex's show yet?
I haven't talked with Alex lately, and I was just down in Texas here, and I probably should have stopped by and seen him and talked to him more about it because, of course, he has a great deal of this information in hand, and so he knows what's going on, and he knows how far this is being pushed. But my sources are a little bit more on the ground than his sources are. I mean, we have people that have direct information that's coming out of. I mean, for instance, I saw the photos this morning of the nukes being moved into theater.
Jeez.
And so it's one thing to have the Iskanders placed into theater, which is the missiles. It's another thing to put a warhead on them. And so the warheads are being moved into theater. So the Russians are now at a point where, and again, I do not believe that the State Department or the Pentagon, which, quite frankly, I'm no longer impressed with their intelligence. And so I don't think they have the slightest idea what Russia is about. But let me see if I can try to put this in perspective. Barack Obama has put 30,000 NATO troops on the Latvian border, on the Lithuanian border, and the Estonian border. Now, they're right at the border with live artillery and live tanks facing Russia. They're right at the border. Well, you have to remember, in 1941, Adolf Hitler put 8 million troops on that very same border. 8 million. And 5 years later, there were 18 million dead Germans and a Russian flag flying over the Reichstag in Berlin.
Yeah.
But the bloodbath that had occurred, there were 5 million dead in the Battle of St. Petersburg on both sides. 5 million dead in the Battle of Stalingrad, which is now Volgograd, on both sides. And when the Russians finally defeated the Germans at Volgograd, they had waited until they went through this attrition, 5 million men each, before General Zhukov, then who was building tens of thousands of tanks right across the river, and the Germans didn't even see it. When he finally launched his offensive to cut off German supply lines, which he cut off entirely, did he attack and demand a defeat? No. He sat there and made them wait out the whole winter until they were engaged in cannibalism inside the German ranks before he finally defeated them.
So this was Hitler in kind of his crazed state. He froze his own army to death. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Hitler was, of course, another socialist fool who he had an economy going, but he couldn't see fit to keep the economy going without warring and killing. And as a result, he ended up totally destroying his own nation. Now, if Obama continues on where he's going, Washington, D.C. is going to look like Berlin in 1946. It's just going to be a heap of rubble.
Do we have enough people in our military that are willing to speak out at this point that might be able to stop this?
No. All the leadership that could have stopped it has been purged. And so there is no leadership to stop it. The only thing that can stop it now is if the American public get wind of what's going on and they, directly petition the United States government to stop this. Now, I mean, look at this. You have Hillary Clinton, there is so much, from a lawyer's point of view, okay? She would be convicted in every court in this country, given the amount of evidence that's stacked up against her right now. There's not a single court that would not convict. But you can't get anyone to even indict her because they're all participating in the Clinton Foundation. So you can't
even the FBI. Remember the guy from the FBI that just kind of let her off? I forget the guy's name.
James
what was going on there?
Well, James Comey used to be the head of financial security for HSBC when HSBC was directly funding ISIS.
Oh, my. So he's dirty,
and
too.
Well, that's exactly right. And he took $2 million from the Clinton Foundation. So,
my
so
goodness.
you're looking at this and you're saying, is there anybody in the FBI who will do something? No. How about the Department of Justice? No. Is there any U.S. attorney? No. Any judge? Well, if there was a judge that stood up against the Clintons' crime family, like Antonin Scalia, for instance,
right,
you might end up dead.
And he was killed,
right?
right?
No judge. Right, he was killed. Even the lawyer that sued the DNC for rigging the primary election scheme against Bernie Sanders, he was killed. And the guy who served process on his behalf was killed.
I didn't even know that. So there was a lawyer that did sue because Bernie Sanders obviously was ripped off by Hillary Clinton, and then he ended up dead.
That's right. And his process server. So, you're not talking about you're talking a crime family here. And
right.
So now the evidence is so overwhelming. And the WikiLeaks portfolio, it's not 33,000 emails, it's 98,000.
Oh,
and then
wow.
you get into the John Podesta emails, where John Podesta is kind of the consigliere, if you will. He's the lawyer for the crime family. And his emails you cannot believe the information that's in those emails.
It's crazy. I haven't heard half of it, really. It's, I'm all ears. Just continue. This is beyond my wildest. I listen to Alex Jones, and this is what makes me angry sometimes, because Alex is so emotional. He yells and he screams, but he sometimes forgets to just sit down and calmly tell people what really has been going on. So I never know if the guy is just, having an emotional fit, or if, something's really going on. But now that I hear this from you, we are literally on the we're almost in World War III. It's just, I'm speechless. Continue.
Yes, we are. And because we're almost in World War III, it's very clearly understood, I believe, between Trump and Vladimir Putin, that should Trump get reelected, Trump will eventually come back to the table as a competitor with Russia. In other words, if Trump gets elected, he's going to engage in rather intense nationalism. And there will be a military buildup under Trump, but it's going to be as a competitive buildup for the United States for defensive purposes. Barack Obama has been nonstop warmongering for 8 years now, the Nobel Peace Prize winner. And, so the Russians know that if Hillary Clinton gets elected, that it's going to be, and they've already said it, that if Hillary gets elected, there's going to be war between the United States and Russia. Absolutely no question. Whereas if you look, if with Trump being elected, we have a chance to abate the war. I don't think Trump will get us. Trump recognizes immediately. First of all, Trump isn't on the Saudi payroll. He made his own money. He doesn't need Saudi money.
Right.
Now, he may have done business with those countries, and he may have had even business interest over there, but that doesn't mean he's on their payroll. And I believe he's independent from their payroll. And so he will come back and say, well, here's what's going to happen. I'm not kowtowing to Saudi Arabia at all, which is why the Saudi-owned press is trying to completely destroy his candidacy. But he comes back and says, I'm not on the Saudi payroll at all. We have no national interest in Syria other than pounding ISIS and eliminating that group of terrorists from the face of the earth. So he would join with Russia in a heartbeat to destroy ISIS. Now, that means that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, they have no chance of pushing their pipeline through Syria. No chance. But that doesn't mean that Trump couldn't negotiate a deal through Iraq, because he's a deal maker. But what it does mean is that the impetus for World War III would go away. So the big question is now is if Hillary Clinton rigs the election such that you have this massive, overwhelming vote for Trump in the general election because people want to restore the nation and they want to talk about national interest. And instead, she gets pushed into office by George Soros and his minions manipulating the election in these 19 states. Then what you're going to see in the United States is, that's assuming we do not go to war between now and the election. And I think even that is a generous assumption.
Right.
Because the war could start on any given trigger and any given event. Any given event could trigger this thing into a worldwide conflagration.
Do you think that, as far as the George Soroses of the world, is World War III more desirable for them?
Well, they're not thinking, again, you have people that are ill-informed as to the Russian capability. And it's not, of course, we wouldn't just be facing Russia, right? We would also be facing North Korea and their previously deployed hydrogen weapons, which orbit over the United States 5 times a day, and their 7 million man army, all of which are 10th degree black belts in Korean fighting method and who can live on a bowl of rice a day. We're also facing China, who is not going to tolerate the United States, who provoked them even yesterday by sending a warship through space that China is declaring to be Chinese waters, and the United States is asserting are international waters. The Philippines has told the United States, get out. So now we're trying to go to New Zealand, who has kicked us out traditionally, and saying, can we please put our ships in your ports since we can't be in the Philippines anymore? The Chinese are currently working with the Russians in Syria, and the Russians are working with the Chinese in the South China Sea. The Iranians are working with Russia to close down the Suez Canal and the Red Sea and to close down the Persian Gulf so that Saudi Arabia is completely cut off. If this war breaks out, Iran will go against Saudi Arabia, India will go against Pakistan, China will assert its interest over the South China Sea, and Russia and the United States are going to go duking it out in Syria until it escalates into a conflict that becomes transcontinental in its nature, and then we'll see who survives when the dust clears. It's a certainty that not much of America will remain.
Tell us more about these hydrogen weapons used by North Korea that are in orbit and across the U.S. I've never heard this before.
Well, Iran and North Korea have been working together to develop nuclear weapons. So Iran can say, we don't have any nuclear weapons, but all the technology that's being developed in Korea, including its missile technology, all comes from Iran, and all the nukes that they develop in North Korea is technology that Iran is making use of. So that's the first thing to understand. The North Koreans succeeded in they've had 3 successful satellite launches. 2 of those launches put hydrogen weapons in an orbit, in a geosynchronous orbit, that comes from the South Pole up over the North Pole, over the center of the United States. And it comes over the United States 5 times a day, south to north. Both of those are hydrogen weapons that are EMPs. So they're at 300,000 feet, which is, roughly 60 miles. 60 miles above the United States. If a hydrogen weapon is detonated at 60 miles above the United States, it most likely will be a coast-to-coast EMP, which means that all electronic communication, the electronic grid, will be completely fried and the country goes dark.
And that right there is enough to just finish us, practically.
Well, it makes us sitting ducks.
Yeah.
Because at that point, our anti-missile systems don't work. You can't deploy weapons. You can't deploy troops. You can't deploy anything. You can't even get across town.
No communications.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And so instead of dealing with these issues like a normal human being, which would be sit down and talk with somebody and stop being an enemy, the United States just keeps threatening and threatening and threatening and threatening. everybody. And the problem is with threatening is that, if you're dealing with, let's say you were dealing with the Sicilian mafia, okay?
Right.
Back in the day. You know that if you don't take out a loan from the Sicilian mafia, there's a pretty good chance that somebody's not going to come to your house and beat you up with a baseball bat and kill you.
Right.
You can predict what the mafia is going to do. But when you have somebody like Hillary Clinton in office, okay, she's just, she's a bull in a china cabinet. So here's Muammar Gaddafi believing that I got rid of my WMDs. I'm not doing anything to harm anybody's national security interest. I'm just living my life out here in Libya, managing the most prosperous nation in all of Africa, right? The people here are living a good life. I'm minding my own business, and I'm staying out of trouble. The next thing you know, he's got Al-Qaeda coming across the Tunisian border, wanting to overthrow his government, and the American press is saying, oh, he is, killing civilians because he's shooting back at the terrorists that Hillary Clinton funded. And he was sodomized to death with a knife.
What?
That's how he died.
And didn't Gaddafi do a lot?
What did he do to America?
Gaddafi was a pretty good leader too, wasn't he? He did a lot for his own country. I heard.
Yeah, his country was I'm sorry about the description of how he died, but it's the truth. And the thing is, with Gaddafi, he had created the most prosperous nation in Africa. Everybody was able to get a university education in the country. He was creating a prosperous currency, and he was about to launch the Libyan dinar, which would have been a gold-backed currency. And so that was another reason to attack, because before the dust had settled in Benghazi, there was a international bank opened in Benghazi. And so he was resistant to the international banking community. Now he's dead, and his gold is gone. So you can see. But the whole world can see. It's no longer any kind of cover. It's that, we see you have gold. Go bomb him, kill his whole family, and steal his gold. Could you articulate a moral reason for doing that? Oh, we don't need to do that anymore. We'll just kill you. Same thing happened in Tunisia. Same thing happened in Sudan. Same thing happened in Yemen. Same thing happened in Somalia. Same thing is happening in Syria. No national interest whatsoever. All of a sudden, Bashar al-Assad, we don't like him either. He's a bad guy. When did he become a bad guy? Well, once we went in there with sarin gas and gassed some of his people and then started blaming him for gassing his own people. That's when he became a bad guy. And so the rest of the world looks at this and says, these guys are absolutely psychotic, genocidal, murdering maniacs. And I know
you remember General Wesley Clark talking about this years ago, that he got a memo that said that we would take out 7 countries in 5 years: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Iran. That's what we're seeing happen.
Now, who came up with that formula? Which president? When I grew up, you had to have public demand. The public was screaming, we need to have this. We need to have farm relief, or we need to have fresh water, or we want to clean up the environment, or whatever the demand might be. But you have a groundswell of demand from the public, and then the federal government would react to that by saying, well, we've passed the Clean Water Act, or we've passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, or whatever it may have been. But you had the government responding to a demand with a problem that was in the nation. Which group of people started lobbying, saying, it's pretty important for us to take out Syria? Which American did you know went to Congress and said, I think we need to attack Syria? Who said that?
Nobody. And when I listen to Bashar al-Assad when he's interviewed, he sounds like a very rational, intelligent, reasonable person. What do you think? Correct me if I'm wrong.
He is, but I can tell you, I think Assad is an intelligent man who is trying to run a country that, it's essentially a third world country. He's trying to run this third world country, and he's trying to protect the country and, maintain a budget. You know what I mean? All the struggles are going to maintaining the country. Now, when he first came into office, he wasn't Dr. Pure by any means. He had special forces that were operating in Lebanon, and those special forces in Lebanon did things against the Christian leadership in Lebanon that he shouldn't have been doing. But, of course, then you had the Israeli invasion, and then Hezbollah, of course, entrenched itself in southern Lebanon. It's a completely different dynamic now. But since Hezbollah has become dominant in Lebanon, Bashar al-Assad Dr. Assad has become a civilized man trying to govern a country intelligently. He's running a secular government, and his secular government has protected the rights of minorities inside his country. That doesn't go on when you have some whacked out Wahhabi, Sunni, extremists like ISIS. When ISIS controlled the region there in Iraq, they imposed the jizya. Now, the jizya says, we're in control of this turf, so these are your choices. You either convert to Islam, you pay this tax, or we behead you. Those are your three choices.
Right.
Well, how much is the tax since I don't want to convert to Islam? Well, it's 10 ounces of gold per person per year.
Not cheap, I imagine.
Well, at that time, it was $18,000 per person per year. And if you couldn't afford it, well, you're beheaded.
Yeah.
They were cutting the arms off children. They were selling 8- and 9-year-old girls into sex slavery. They were burning people alive, beheading Christians, burning down churches. The most barbaric stuff we have seen since Genghis Khan. And Obama sent an American aircraft to bomb on their behalf. Obama dropped supplies to them, directly funded them, set up medical procedures on their behalf. And just recently, last month, American aircraft attacked the Syrian army in Syria. Now, that is an act of war.
Right.
American troops attacking Syrian troops, act of war. They attacked the Syrian troops. They killed 64 Syrians, wounded 100 others, and 7 minutes later, ISIS attacked that very same position.
I heard Assad talking about this, that it was, I think our government said this was a mistake, but it went on for like an hour. There were like 4 different airstrikes. Yeah, it's crazy.
Right. It wasn't a mistake. No chance. And then, of course, the Russians who had been listening in on the control of who was orchestrating the attack, right? It was being orchestrated from a bunker inside Syria. Intelligence officers that were coordinating the strike, giving the coordinates, sending in the aircraft, and then directing ISIS to move in with an attack after they had all of this communication, all of it recorded. So 3 days later, you never heard this in the American press. 3 days later, the Russians launched 3 Caliper missiles from a destroyer in the Mediterranean Sea, 160 miles away, and they hit that command bunker inside Syria.
Really?
Killing 30 Mossad officers in uniform.
Whoa.
And American officers in uniform, and
Whoa.
Saudi and Turk and Qatari officers.
Whoa. Well, that could be the reason we're getting all this saber rattling, right?
Of course.
We had that one general who, I don't even remember this guy's name, but he just didn't seem right to me. He gets up, we're going to hit you harder than you've ever been hit before. What is that? So that's probably what that's all about, I'm guessing.
Sure, that was Mike Milley. Yeah, Mike Milley said that, the Supreme Commander of the United States Army. He made that statement. And, of course, it was right after that the Russians went into all their nuclear bunkers And that was when Russia was expecting 800 aircraft to come in against Damascus. And that's when they deployed their submarines against the United States. And we're preparing for a preemptive nuclear strike in the United States.
So what do you have any guesses about what we'll see next? Will this calm down? What do you think is going to happen next?
Well, I pray continually that it's going to calm down.
Good.
We do not have, in my opinion, intelligent leadership. We most assuredly do not have much.
Of course not. I mean, I like Trump. I shouldn't say I like Trump. I support Trump. I don't know the man. I support Trump. He's just a businessman. He's the only guy that we've had in there probably since Kennedy that hasn't been bought off. He's the last chance that I think we have of maintaining our country. What are your comments? Continue.
Okay, so I'll share this with you. I see a couple of scenarios. One scenario is that Barack Obama finally realizes that he is outgunned, and he gets stalemated by the Russians such that he can't do what he wants to do. Now, if the Russians succeed in stalemating him and we get to a Trump election and Trump is actually declared the victor because we've prevented the voter fraud that Hillary Clinton is going to try to pull off, under those circumstances, we're going to be able to walk into 2017 with an opportunity to make peace. I think at that point, Barack Obama will be completely a lame duck. I believe the bureaucracies in Washington, D.C. are going to move against him immediately because it's going to be clear to them there's going to be a shift of power on January 21st, and they will begin to move against him. They'll begin shutting the doors, to begin ignoring the executive orders, and they'll begin closing him out, and he will become an immediate and complete lame duck. I think cooler heads may prevail at the NSA. Cooler heads may prevail at the FBI. I think James Comey will be forced out of the FBI. Loretta Lynch will probably be up in front of Congress on an impeachment. And so she's going to be forced out of the AG's office. And they're going to, people are going to rise to the top in the AG's office and rise to the top in the FBI office that you've never heard of before. And but they're guys in the second and third tiers that are going to move up to begin controlling these agencies. You're going to see a reinstatement of these agencies, and once that happens, you're going to begin to see prosecutions happen where the most notorious people are going to be going to jail. And one of those, of course, if the election by November 9th, if Hillary Clinton has not prevailed in the election, she will be indicted and arrested, and so will her husband. And there's a good chance her daughter may be. John Podesta is most assuredly going to be arrested. And there will be other people that are going to be in that inner web that are going to be picked up and arrested and indicted. And there's going to be significant charges brought against them. And
why
so
Podesta?
This is one scenario. Podesta,
Why?
I mean, you have to go back and read. You got to go back and read the emails talking about they had to do a wet job where Scalia was concerned in Texas. That's
so he's behind the death of Scalia?
I'm just telling you what the email said. They had to do a wet job in Texas with Scalia.
Okay. Gotcha.
He also talks about the sarin gas going into Syria. He talks about the funding arrangement with the Russian mafia through the Clinton Foundation. Read the Podesta emails. And
so Podesta is no choir boy.
Yeah, not even close. So that's one. That's probably the best case scenario.
Right.
That's best case scenario. And even then, we're going to be on pins and needles all the way through January 21st. Trump has to survive to take the office. And once that happens, I think you're going to see a lot of stuff come undone, particularly in New York. You're going to see all kinds of heads rolling in the major news agencies. There's going to be people scrambling. There's going to be some of these major corporations trying to duck for tax cover because they haven't been paying taxes since Obama took office. And so you'll see a lot of other things that are going to start to go on. So, Trump calls it draining the swamp, and it's going to take a lot to drain that swamp, right? Now, that's best case scenario. Now, next scenario is that we don't have war, but that they try to install Hillary Clinton into the federal government. Now, if that happens and they declare Hillary Clinton the winner, you're going to see all kinds of things take place. Number one, the first thing you're going to see is civil disobedience. You're going to see a lot of people just saying, okay, there is no federal law we're going to respect anymore at all. And if the feds try to enforce it, it's going to be back in the days with the moonshiners and the revenuers, where there's going to be federal agents that are just simply not going to survive in their position when they try to enforce federal law. And you're also going to see the states start to move on 10th Amendment grounds, saying, we're going to take the 10th Amendment back. We're telling the Supreme Court, you've voiced your opinion, but in our opinion, your opinion only applies to federal law and federal jurisdiction and things of a federal jurisdiction. Where our state is concerned, we're rejecting your opinion on same-sex marriage. We're rejecting your opinion on this. We're rejecting your opinion on that. We, as our government has looked at it, we think you're wrong in that opinion, and therefore you're out. The Supreme Court is out. Don't come into this state. We will arrest you. And feds will begin to be arrested in statewide jurisdictions. They'll be thrown right in jail for violating state law, and the states will begin to assert themselves. The next thing that will happen is you're going to see Texas start to push ahead and say, well, as Texas, we want a constitutional convention, and we want to reconsider the whole kit and caboodle. And you're going to see a lot of states, and I'm going to guess the vast majority, 34 to 37 states, are going to join in creating a new union with Texas, and they'll just walk away from Washington, D.C. and say, we're not part of that establishment anymore. This is our country, not that one. You guys can govern the coast with all your blue liberal friends, and you can try to pay for your own welfare state. We're out. And I can tell you that scenario I think is bolstered by a number of things. First of all, you got a technology that is coming. That is, you have this artificial intelligence coming. You have also information increasing, and the information is increasing at dramatic rates. So all of this thing with these crime families operating in the dark, all this stuff is coming out. They can't hide it anymore. Mm-hmm. So with this information coming, you're going to be, like, for instance, do you have Uber in your city?
No, I don't like Uber. We can talk about Uber. You're talking about the driverless cars, right?
No. Uber is a kind of an alternative taxi service. So basically, you sign up. You download the Uber app, and then you say, I want to go from the airport to the convention center, and then a driver picks that up. Okay. And he comes and picks you up in his car, not a taxi cab. He picks you up in his car that has to meet certain criteria, and then they take you to the convention place, and then you have to pay a fee, which is dramatically lower than a taxi fee.
I think that's a good thing, but what I think they want to do is take away our right to travel, and they want to put us in these driverless cars where we'll only be allowed to go where they want us to. Now, this is kind of just my own thoughts. I continue.
No,
sorry
sure.
about that.
That's what they would like to do. But what I'm trying to point out is that what you see is in this Uber model, in the financial model that is Uber, they're also talking about that, and it might even occur in commercial aircraft, where you have people who have private jets that begin to operate as kind of a jet taxi service. But the point is that what you see is that you begin to see that these independent streams of commerce are going to be created because of the digital technology that once again is totally the law that we have established, because legislatures are notoriously slow. But technology is moving at 4 years per year. Mm-hmm. And so when you see the technology advancing, it's just outstripping everything that can happen with Congress behind it. So what you're going to see is the technology begin to create these independent things that occur that are they're not national things, they're technological things. And so the government is just not going to be able to stop or control or even maintain what is happening because the information is moving so fast. I mean, we're moving into that age of AI, artificial
Right.
intelligence.
Right.
And as we move into that age, that has its own scary aspects to it.
Oh yeah.
But in the meantime, what you see with AI is you're going to see that there is going to become a completely different world that is going to abandon all of this crooked, criminal garbage that's going on and will allow people to move away. Like, for instance, let me give you an example. If you move into Bitcoin, for instance, the digital currency, you move into Bitcoin, are you functioning inside the Bank of International Settlements? No, not at all. Are you No, not at all. You're that and totally outside the control of different systems of government.
Stephen, you're breaking up. You're breaking up, Stephen. I can't even hear you now.
Okay, all right. Let me call you right back.
Oh, okay. Go ahead and do that. Yeah, folks, what a show, man. I'm just overwhelmed here. We are on the brink of World War III, and that's Stephen Pidgeon, attorney at law. He has a lot of fantastic information. I think last show we kind of got sidetracked a little bit on ancient history and ancient language, and little did I know that we were really this close to World War III. Hopefully his cell phone hasn't died or something. There he is. Let's get Stephen back on the air here. Okay, Stephen, you're back on the air. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I was just saying, what you will see is you'll see people's life and people's lifestyles emerge outside of a government construct that was constructed back in the 17th or 18th century, being able to even control it in any way. And so it's going to be a big difference. And
so we might actually get through all this and move into a productive time.
Yes, if we can get past this last-ditch effort of these communist criminals that have been running this country for the last 30 years, if we can get past this criminal crime cabal and without going into World War III, we're going to see a massively productive time. You're going to see with the Trump election, I think over the first 4 years, he will probably succeed in creating 25 million jobs. Obama wiped out 50 million. So he's talking about trying to reclaim half of that. So he'll reclaim probably 25 million jobs. There's a question about whether or not his proposed value-added tax or tariff is going to function like he thinks it will, but I believe it will. I support the idea that if you want to sell it here, build it here. If you want to build it over there, sell it over there.
Right.
But if you shouldn't be allowed to put a car on our multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure without paying a premium for being able to do it. And so he's insistent on bringing manufacturing and industry back into the country and bringing those kinds of jobs back. I think he's going to succeed in doing that. I think he's going to succeed in revitalizing the oil and natural gas industry in the country. And you're going to see a lot of people back to work. When that happens, you're going to see things American being restored. So, yeah, if we can get past this election and we can get Trump into office on January 21st, you're going to see an explosively productive time. And it's going to be a very heady time of lots of wealth being generated and all this other thing. And he will also, because there's no possible way that a war with Russia works into his economic plan. So all that stuff is going to be put aside, be put on the shelf.
But on the other hand, if Hillary gets in, we could, let's say Hillary gets in and we don't see World War III, then we could see the split up of the U.S., right?
Oh, I think that's almost assured. You will see there are so many Americans that are simply not going to put up with it anymore. And there's so many things. People think that the only thing they can do is, revolt so that martial law is going to be declared and UN MRAPs are going to be somewhere downtown. That's a bunch of baloney. There are so many things that can be done. For instance, complete abandonment of the Federal Reserve note. That's premise number one.
Right.
Premise number 2, civil disobedience against federal laws on a massive scale, where everybody in the country just says we're not doing that because we're not obeying those people because they have no legitimate right to govern, and they are not governing with the consent of the governed. Period.
Right.
You don't even have to overthrow them. You just blow them off. Then the next thing is the people saying we do not accept you as having our consent. We do not accept. You're not a legitimate government. You have no legitimate right to govern. You know, if you say the Constitution is dead, then by what right do you hold the office? The office was created by the Constitution. Constitution's dead. Get out. There's no office. Leave.
I like the idea of Trump getting in and the prosperity and all that. Believe me, that sounds really fantastic, and I hope that's where we go. But something tells me this whole thing with Hillary is very much a possibility. But if that does occur, it sounds like if we do emphasize states' rights, and maybe the U.S. has to kind of break up a little bit, that we can still have a time of prosperity, hopefully without a civil war, though, right?
Well, it's very interesting, and if you don't mind my shifting gears for just a little bit, if you look, I just spent a long weekend in San Antonio, Texas, at a prophecy conference, and we were talking about some very interesting instruments in prophecy. Now, if you look at Babylon is the idea of a house within a house. And so we talked about tonight that this government has been overthrown.
Right.
It's a usurped government. I don't believe Barack Obama won the Democratic nomination in 2008. He was given the nomination because he threatened Clinton's daughter. And
really?
So Hillary gave him Florida. Oh, sure. Look. The night before the Democratic nomination was to be confirmed, the head of the Arkansas Democratic Party was murdered in Arkansas.
Oh, here we go again, right?
Hillary Clinton, who had won Michigan and who had won Florida, gave Florida and Michigan to Barack Obama, and then he became the Democratic nominee.
Jeez.
In 2008, he lost that general election, but they had voter fraud in key states, the same states that Hillary's going to use to pull out voter fraud, where he received 124% of the vote. There were precincts in Pennsylvania that had not one vote cast against Barack Obama. Not one.
That's not real.
He received 140% of the vote in some counties in Florida. I mean, it's
right.
Pure voter fraud, right? And
dead
so
people voting, right?
He didn't win the 2008 nomination. He didn't win the 2008 election. He didn't win the 2012 election. Those were all manipulated, fabricated elections. So completely usurped government. And even if he did win it, he doesn't have any legal right to hold the office at all. He's not even holding it under his real name. He's never proved he's an American citizen. So it's a totally usurped government. And now he has so obliterated the Constitution that they have no legitimate right to govern. And when Hillary Clinton comes in and says, well, Second Amendment, never even read that, and who cares whether or not I'm a war criminal and I've committed crimes against humanity and umpteen counts of treason and umpteen counts of espionage, all that stuff means nothing. Okay, well, if it means nothing for you, Hillary, then it means nothing for the rest of us. If nobody can get indicted for committing treason, then what country do we have?
Well, even back when Hillary and Bill were back in Mena, Arkansas, weren't they flying, the cocaine was being flown into the U.S. from South America, and I think that CIA agent Barry Sears was the guy that was flying the plane. And I've heard that a lot of the money from that cocaine sales was laundered through the Rose law firm that Hillary was a part of. Have you heard that whole story?
Oh, sure. I mean, the whole business of Mena Air Force Base and Don Lasseter, from the Ponderosa Steakhouse chain, having 4 Learjets on the tarmac at Mena Air Force Base for cocaine distribution throughout the country. And anybody who's witnessed it, including the 2 young boys that were left murdered along the train tracks.
Right.
That it's so that history is so sordid. It's so bad. But, it's always been about drug running for the Clintons. Always. And, Afghanistan is nothing but a drug running operation. And so, when do we take the drug runners out of power in the executive branch? When is that house cleaned out?
Well, wasn't Bush Sr. even behind the drug running in Mena, Arkansas as well?
Well, yes. And the answer is yes. And I mean, and of course, a lot of Republicans don't want to hear this, but it was H.W. Bush who established the whole cocaine industry in South America during the Nixon administration when he was running the CIA. They put Noriega in power in Panama. They put the Escobar family in power in Colombia. They put in the cocaine crops and the infrastructure for producing the cocaine. The answer was we couldn't maintain Vietnam anymore. And Vietnam was about, moving all that heroin out of the Golden Triangle into the world. We were trying to control that heroin market. And when we had 55,000 dead and LBJ could no longer live with himself over what he had done in Vietnam, and all the American youth that had died over there and had been, permanently injured over there, it was a horrendous time. Nixon finally said, what do? We got to get out of Vietnam. And so it was H.W. Bush who said, well, we can create a cocaine market here inside the Western Hemisphere, and we can control that. And cocaine would be better for you than heroin anyway. And so all of that was developed. And when Manuel Noriega was going to go public and tell the world about it, H.W. Bush had him, we just went down and invaded Panama and grabbed the guy and stuck him in a jail cell so nobody could ever talk to him. And that's where he sits to this day.
So has all of our presidents since Kennedy, it's just been one line, one wall of corruption? Would you say that's the case?
No, I'd say Reagan was the exception.
Reagan was the exception, and they shot him,
Reagan
right, to kind of get him back under control.
Shot him. That's right. And after they shot him, he was under control.
Sure.
And of course, he was shot by the son of an associate of the Bush family.
It's hard to believe how corrupt our government has been for so long.
Yeah, I know.
It's just really hard to wrap your mind around. At least it is for me. I mean, I've been learning about it more and more lately. I have the book Clinton's War on Women by Roger Stone. Have you read that one yet?
I haven't, but I know what Roger said in it.
Yeah. It's a real education because it's so crazy that, your average American just can't believe it's true.
Right. I know. I know for most people it's like you can't imagine the kinds of crimes that are committed by the ruling class. But so many of these people, I mean, if Alex Jones did an expose on the Bohemian Grove, well, that should have been enough to alarm everybody in America. But in America, we have people that are under deception. See, I am greatly heartened by a couple of things in America because I believe that we have two houses in America. We have the true America, which, I believe is the true Israel, right? All of the 12 tribes are here. And then you have Babylon, which is this usurped government that is controlling us. So we're in captivity to Babylon. We're in Babylonian captivity. Now, Babylon is going to be destroyed. I mean, that's what the prophecy says. But what
that's
about
the U.S.?
Israel? Well, that's the U.S. government.
Right.
That's the U.S. government. And what about Israel? What about the people of America? Now, there are many people. There's things going on right now. There's a conference going right now between the American natives, right, the indigenous tribes in America.
Mm-hmm.
They have been meeting this week, praying and forgiving the United States for all of its breaches of contracts. That's going on right now.
Wow.
There have been people meeting all over the country that have been reconciling themselves to this commitment of righteousness. That is to say, to walk away from the perversions that have been put in America over the last 70, 80 years, right? Which includes this idea, America's number one import right now is pornography.
Right.
We have to roll back away from all of this stuff. We have to roll back from the abortion. We have to roll back from the petrodollar. The petrodollar is a false weight and measure. We have looted the whole world with this petrodollar. Looted the whole world. And so as a consequence, we have things that we have to reconcile for. We have to turn away from these things. Now, if we turn away from the petrodollar and we create real currency, we move away from the Federal Reserve note and create real currency, we will immediately incur economic health.
Right.
But you have to, you got to rid yourself of the parasites, which are these international bankers, putting this false currency on us. So the Federal Reserve has to go away, and the Federal Reserve note has to go away, and a real currency has to come into place. We have to walk away from the policy of abortion, and we have to start to value the life in the womb. And if we begin to value the life in the womb, then we begin to value the family to take care of the life in the womb. And once we begin to value the life in the womb, then families begin to be reinstated. Then we start working as a society to promote and protect the family, which becomes the building block of small industry, which becomes the building block of a sustained, healthy economy. So all these things work together that when we start walking back into righteousness, we start walking back into blessing, and we start walking back into health. It's just an automatic thing that will happen. And so the question is now is, do I believe that the country is turning its heart in that direction? And I do believe that. There are wildfires of spiritual growth going on in this country now, all over the country. And even though the press is telling us that everybody's going Islamic and they're trying to import as many Muslims as they possibly can, as quickly as they can to destroy whatever whatever fabric is left of this nation in order for the Saudi kings to exalt themselves, all of that stuff's going to come to a very screeching halt here. And so the question is, have we gotten out of Babylon? That's the question. Come out of her, my people, lest ye share in her plagues. It's written in Scripture. And so we come out of Babylon, but you have to come out in your heart, You have to come out. You have to come out away from the abortion. You have to come out away from the Federal Reserve note. You have to come away from the welfare check. And you have to come away, and that's corporate welfare. You have to come away from all of that stuff and put that stuff away and live a different life. And if America does that, then we can walk away from all of this still as a healthy people and as a healthy country.
Well, I sure hope that happens. I'd like to think that we can straighten things out and that we can recover from this insanity, which is even much more insane than I ever thought. Another thing I'd like to see is us to take also a better care of wildlife and take better care of our state parks and builds our roads in such a way that we don't have so much roadkill. And I think that I also think that we may want to stop all immigration because I think our population in the U.S. is extremely high right now, and I'm not so sure we need to mix other cultures in our culture. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I think that restoring wildlife is a very important thing. I mean, I've seen great videos of the buffalo running again in the Midwest, and who wouldn't be blessed by seeing, the millions and millions of buffalo, running wild through, Nebraska, Kansas again, right? I mean, it'd be a beautiful thing to see the buffalo running again, of course. And, but when you're talking about all of this kind of reinstatement, I mean, there's lots of things that can happen in terms of us restoring a natural, if you will, a natural and organic life. There's been a mass rebellion, civil disobedience, if you will, to what Monsanto has been giving us, with genetically modified foods that are now, who knows what these foods are. I mean, for instance, to give you an example, I can't and will not eat that pen-reared salmon. Okay, I'm not going to do it. I grew up in Alaska. I know what a good coho looks like. That pen-reared salmon, they've introduced DNA from stuff that's not even fish. Right?
Wow.
And I can't eat these. When you're talking about some kind of chimera clone that they're trying to call food, I'm not eating it. I'm not going to digest that stuff. And then they introduce this food that looks like you get these strawberries that are the size of a small hand grenade, and they look beautiful beyond belief. And you take a bite in them, and it's like eating a cotton ball. There's no flavor, there's no sweetness, there's no nothing, right?
Yeah.
And I see this genetically modified food. Well, great. It might look good. It's got zero nutrition, and on and on and on. So the reinstatement of quality food, there's a real push in America to come back for quality food. And as we come back into these kinds of things, there is a question about how do we live, and there is an organic way of life. But when you go back to the days before we looted the world with our fake currency, the average family had one car. Now, there were some families that had two, but the average family had one car. The average family had one TV. The average family had one phone, right? And somehow we all grew up as people who were strong and healthy. And, and I'm not trying to say that there should be any kind of limitation on that, but what I'm trying to say is there's more to life than sticking your face in front of your cell phone 12 hours a day.
Exactly. So, but we've been kind of led down the wrong path, don't you think?
Oh, sure. And look at what we've lost, okay? In the 90s, you saw the internet begin to start to proliferate. You saw the digital world start to proliferate. And as the digital world started to proliferate, what were the first things to take the big hit? Well, symphony orchestras,
sure,
ballets, operas, live theater. You go to Broadway now. Broadway is 1/10 of what it was in its heyday. Most of the theaters are closed, and you have a few hits, and that's it. And so what you see this huge loss in the fine arts, and the fine arts are given to us in order to bring these long vibrations of life to a perpetual understanding. In other words, if you spend your whole life working your fingers to the bone in order to succeed, and then you turn 65 and you have succeeded, how do you understand that from a perceptual level? The way you understand it is in the fine arts, giving that to you in music, giving that to you in dance, giving that to you in theater. The fine arts bring it down to a perceptual level. And so the whole instruments of life that really celebrate the real great things in life, which are expressed in the fine arts, that completely disappeared in favor of playing video games.
Right.
Now you want fine art. Well, let's go to Google Images and look at pictures of fine art. Not look at the fine art itself, just look at pictures of fine art. Everything is virtual. And, I can remember the days when we used to have great audio. Now it's no more audio. Now it's a sound bar on the television, right? Or enhanced speakers in your cell phone or your new earbuds. So we've lost a real quality to life by being pushed into this digital world. And I'll ask you, this digital world was created to be, energy-saving devices, right?
Sure.
Are you working less?
No, I'm working more. I work every day now. Yeah, that's a good point.
I think we have the answer, right?
Yeah.
Because human beings will always compete, right?
Absolutely. Stephen, I want to thank you. I mean, I can't believe that 2 hours just went by. I'm going to have to take notes on this show to really digest all the information that you've covered. We've got about 5 minutes left. Why don't you tell people about your websites and your books and anything else you want to close with?
Well, sure. I mean, the thing that I'm doing right now is it's a collection of sacred scripture called the Et Sefer. That's CEPHER.net, and this is where we're doing most of our work right now. I've got a very extensive blog on that website. I think I have about 300 postings on the blog right now that has a great deal of discussion that I think most people are going to find meaningful and applicable in their life at this time. And we have a lot of stuff going on with the Sefer and our new app that's also available. And because I see, of course, our path out of these troubles and this crisis and this fraud and this criminality by walking back into a path of righteousness and walking back into a path really that God has created and points to us and calls us to. And I think we need to find that path. Whether or not we're in the end times, whether or not we're facing World War III, whether or not prophecy is correct or not, we still have a calling to walk back in the paths of righteousness. And so I really hope people do that. Check out the site at sefer.net, CEPHER.net. And I want to thank you, too, for having me on the show to be able to talk about this stuff. I don't get the opportunity to speak about a lot of this information because most people don't want to hear it. But I wanted to disclose it. You've given me the opportunity before to talk about some of these things, and I wanted to take this opportunity to really lay these things on the table so that your listeners can hear exactly how close we are and how precarious things are, what kind of danger we're in right now, and how important it is that they participate now in the restoration of the nation. And it begins with the restoration of the self, the restoration of your own family. So pay attention to what's going on in front of you. And I think if people can do that, we will find our way out of these treacherous waters.
Well, Stephen, I'll try to get back with you in about 4 to 6 weeks, and shoot, by then we'll kind of know what path we're on, right?
Yes, we will, assuming that it's not all smoke, not smoke and mirrors,
right.
Just pure smoke.
All right, Stephen, have a good evening. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks so much, Mark.